LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the October 10th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me. Today I'll be using the 11 best, most newsworthy clips I picked out from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the Big Five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really informative, educational, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all today. My main topic is a multiple topic. It's, as you can see from the video title, Armageddon, Abortion, and Other October Surprises. And I'll get to the Armageddon part. That was President Biden saying that we're closer to Armageddon than we've been since the Cuban Missile Crisis back in the 1960s. And I'll have some newsmaker and news summary clips on that. But I'm going to order my clips a little differently than I usually do, again, like I did last week, because I want to address the topic first, that I have a pundit panel and a newsmaker clip from yesterday's Sunday show that I'll show before the news summaries, and both are referencing this political comedy clip I picked to start off the show. This is a clip from the person who might be the dumbest member of the U.S. Senate. I mean, the dumbest member of the U.S. Senate could be Ron Johnson of Wisconsin or Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee, but I think it could very well be this next guy, Tommy Tuberville. I mean, his name is spelled like Tuberville, but they're saying Tuberville. So Senator Tommy Tuberville from Alabama, who was in Nevada at a Trump rally last weekend, and he said a bunch of crazy stuff that I've included in this clip, but the big racist part was his use of the word reparations, so look for that. But he started off saying Democrats could care less instead of couldn't care less. I mean, that's a mistake a lot of people make. And it just went downhill from there, as I'll explain after we watch that clip from C-SPAN together over here.
The Democratic Party could care less. Now, I have never, and I travel the country, I've never seen like the crime in this country. We all grew up respecting the police, our moral values, doing what we could do to help the law enforcement in this country. The Democratic Party, they have a majority. They could stop this crime today. Some people say, well, they're soft on crime. No, they're not soft on crime. They're pro-crime. They want crime. They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. Bullshit. They are not owed that. We have to understand what's going on. Folks, what's going on is a takeover from underneath our country, from the people from behind the scenes, to create such havoc on our streets that we're afraid to go outside, that they can control us. They could stop it today. They don't want to do it. The inflation. Let me tell you, I'm not an economist. I'm an American. I believe in this country. My dad died in the military for this country. But let me tell you something. The economy starts with oil and gas. You can't run a country without oil and gas. It is impossible. When we take the Senate back over and get the House back over, we're going to make Joe Biden open the spigots and get this oil and gas flowing again. We can't do it the way they're doing it. They say climate change. Climate change. Climate change. We need to be worried about our water and our food. We all love this country. We all love the world. God changes the climate. God changes the climate.
God changes the climate. That was something else that was in there that was kind of ridiculous. Oh, and there was another part there that I thought was kind of amusing. He didn't say I'm not an economist. I think he said I'm not an economist. I'm not an economist. I'm an American. Like, economists can't be Americans, but whatever. Anyway, that was kind of an amusing part of that. But the part that got the most coverage on the Sunday morning news shows was the part where he said that they're not soft on crime, they're pro-crime. They want people to commit crimes because the people who they believe that they get to commit crimes because they're owed reparations. And reparations, that's like something that has been discussed for many years for African Americans to get, blacks to get reparations based on slavery. So that was pretty clearly a racist statement. And the thing is, it actually kind of like, I hear this all the time on the news shows, it said the quiet part out loud, but the quiet part out loud from something that I've talked about many, many times, because for most of my live streams over my left shoulder, I've had The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, which is a great book, like a paradigm shifting book. And one of the main thesis of The New Jim Crow is that when Jim Crow was over, where the South could no longer explicitly separate people based on race, like American apartheid and all that. So that was over. Brown versus Board of Education, no separate but equal anymore. So what happened after that? Well, the so-called criminal justice system, which a lot of us call the criminal legal system because it doesn't involve a lot of justice for a lot of people. Well, the next iteration of Jim Crow was transitioning the criminal legal system into a new system of racial control, to control people racially, but using race-neutral terms, like talking about crime instead of black people, and controlling black people through the criminal legal system. And that's basically what Tommy Tuberville said the quiet part out loud, that basically made it plain that the thesis of The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander is accurate, that our criminal legal system is a system of racial control. And the racism was commented on multiple of the Sunday news shows, and I'm going to show you, this is my favorite. They go through the panel on CNN's State of the Union, Bakari Sellers, Nina Turner, and then this guy Scott Jennings and Mia Love. So they have two people on the left, two people on the right. Everybody pretty much agrees Tommy Tuberville should not have said what he said, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Messaging, Alabama Republican Senator Tommy Tuberville hit the stage at former President Trump's rally in Nevada last night. And, well, let's just roll the tape.
They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. Bullshit. They are not owed that.
Now, just to be clear, they want reparation because they think that people that do the crime are owed that. There's no other way to read that sentence, and we've reached out several times to Tuberville's team. There's no other way to read that other than black people want reparations and they do the crime.
Is that what he means by they? When he keeps saying
exactly
they want that or
there's only one conversation
exactly
about reparations, and it's for descendants.
And crime. Tommy Tuberville can go to hell. And let me tell you why. The fact is, he made tens of millions of dollars off unpaid black men as a football coach. He literally has the stature he has because people went out there and assumed the risk and incurred the risk of concussions, playing hard and everything. And then for him to give these racist tropes, it infuriates me. But this is a large swath of the Republican Party that they have to deal with that they've never done.
Yeah, they just flat out, he talking about black people. He should man up and say it. American descendants of slaves do deserve reparations in this country. They absolutely do. But for him to equate a whole group of people as being criminal, you know what's criminal? allowing people to languish in poverty, not supporting policies that will lift people up. That is what's criminal.
By the way, there's a way to talk about crime in this campaign. It's an important issue. A lot of people are worried about it.
It is.
This ain't it.
Well,
There it is.
Now, objectively speaking, we do have violent
blacks
crime
are also
problems.
overwhelmingly
We have-
victims of crime.
And
right.
people across the political spectrum are worried about it.
Sure.
And so there's a way to discuss issues that are very serious. And the same.
But
It's a way to
his
talk
true
about
nature came out.
being upset with the police department and saying, listen, we can't defund police. We can't. There's a way to talk about it. And again, it's just when somebody shows you who they are, you have to
believe.
But I mean, we
believe
have
them.
to.
And it's
I'm sorry.
it's unfortunate that we're sitting here table in America today and we're having this conversation.
But I wish we were having a conversation about early childhood education. I wish we were having a conversation that the reason that
So there you see the entire CNN State of the Union panel are agreeing that what Senator Tommy Tuberville said at that Minden, Nevada Trump rally was pretty damn racist. I mean, how else could you read the reference to reparations there? I mean, like I said, it's the quiet part out loud from the new Jim Crow, but over on NBC News' Meet the Press, Chuck Todd wasn't there, but Kristin Welker was there as the host of Meet the Press, and I don't know, does she cross-examine this Republican member of Congress, Don Bacon from Nebraska? She lets him get away with saying that what Tommy Tuberville said was, I don't want to say it's racist. Well, maybe she should have asked him, well, what did he mean when he said reparations then? I mean, there is one follow-up question, but I don't know. Could there have been better cross-examination than you see here? You can let me know what you think after we watch that second. This is the Newsmaker clip. I promised you a pundit panel and a Newsmaker clip. After this, I'm going to get to the news summaries and whether we're facing the biggest threat of Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis that's coming up. But first, here is a Republican sort of getting cross-examined on whether Tommy Tuberville said something racist on NBC News' Meet the Press yesterday over here.
Let me ask you about another campaign issue. Obviously, the issue of crime has loomed large. I want to ask you about some comments that we heard from Senator Tommy Tuberville overnight at a rally with former President Trump. Take a listen. I'll get your reaction on the other side.
Some people say, well, they're soft on crime. No, they're not soft on crime. They're pro-crime. They want crime. They want crime because they want to take over what you got. They want to control what you have. They want reparation because they think the people that do the crime are owed that. Bull.
Are those comments appropriate for a sitting U.S. Senator, Congressman?
Well, I wouldn't say it the same way, but there is a problem in our country with crime. Major cities have seen a 40 to 50% increase in violent crime, and the primary reason, in my view, is we have these far-left prosecutors, county attorneys, and mayors who are releasing violent criminals back on the street.
But Congressman, there is a different way to say that. I mean, most people heard those comments and felt not just polite, but a lot of people heard those comments as being racist.
Yeah, that's not the way I present things, but we got to be honest that we have a crime problem in our country.
But do you feel as though those comments
releasing
cross a racial line, Congressman? Do they cross a racial line?
I'm not going to say he's being racist, but I wouldn't use that language. Be more polite. But the fact is, we can't ignore we have a 40 to 50% violent crime increase. And it's because Democrat politicians and prosecutors are putting violent criminals back on the street early. And it's unacceptable. When a guy commits a crime the first time, shame on them. When society releases that same criminal and they create more victims, that's shame on us for letting that happen.
Let me ask.
And too many Democrat politicians are releasing these criminals on the street.
Let me ask you very quickly about what is happening inside your own party. According to our NBC News.
So, yeah, I don't know. There wasn't a lot of good cross-examination there. And what was like violent crime up 50%? Actually, I think the FBI statistics that just came out had violent crime down slightly from 2021 to 2022. But, I mean, we're still in 2022 and some of those statistics were estimates. There were some big cities that hadn't provided their crime data to the FBI. But anyway, I don't want to go off on that whole tangent, but I don't think Kristin Welker did a great job of cross-examining Don Bacon there. I don't know if she's like upholding the Chuck Todd legacy of bad cross-examination, but Chuck Todd wasn't even there, and Meet the Press still didn't do a good job of cross-examination. But anyway, you can tell me what you think of those first 3 clips on this weird racist statement from, well, CNN's JakeTapper called him Tommy Tuberville. NBC News's Meet the Press, Kristin Welker called him Tommy Tuberville. Is he Tuberville or Tuberville? I don't know if he's Tuberville. I don't know if he's Tuberville. I just know he is a racist, or at least he made some very racist comments in Minden, Nevada over the weekend. And I don't know why Don Bacon couldn't say that they were racist. I don't want to say it's racist to say that we're letting people commit crimes as their reparations. What is that supposed to mean if it's not racist? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And now I'm going to show you the news summaries from the Big 5 corporate outlets, from the longest one to the shortest one. The longest one is ABC News' This Week with George Stephanopoulos, where co-host Martha Raddatz was hosting this week, and she did a news summary on multiple topics. But there's a lot of reporting on what's going on in Ukraine, the blowing up of this bridge from Russia to Crimea, the President Biden comments about that we're closest to nuclear Armageddon than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think this actually was, if that's your focus, like nuclear Armageddon is the most important story of the week, which, you know, blowing up the world, that's an important story. I mean, more people are dying from COVID than anything else, but that wasn't really reported this week. But the possibility that theoretically people could die from nuclear bombs being set off around the world, I guess that's an important story, and that's the most important story on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz and Britt Clennett give you this report on the explosion of the bridge between Russia and Crimea, the threats from Russia and North Korea, and Crimea, Russia, explosions. This is, I guess, the Armageddon topic that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. A sobering week with President Biden warning of the possibility of nuclear Armageddon with Russia and North Korea possibly preparing to conduct a nuclear test while sending a ballistic missile over Japan. The White House says they have seen no sign of any imminent use of nuclear weapons by Vladimir Putin. But this morning, the only bridge connecting Russia to Crimea, the region which Putin annexed in 2014, is partially collapsed after a large explosion on the bridge that appeared to come from a truck bomb. A humiliation for Putin and the loss of a major Russian supply route for military reinforcements into Ukraine. ABC's Britt Clennett is in Ukraine this morning. And Britt, this is a significant setback for Putin after an already devastating week.
That's right, Martha. As you say, it's Russia's only bridge to Crimea, and it was hit in spectacular fashion. You know, this video circulating online shows the moment of the massive explosion, part of it engulfed in flames. Now, Russia says a truck bomb exploded, causing 7 railway cars to catch fire, tearing apart one section of the roadway, killing 3 people at least. Now, the bridge is a key supply line for Russian troops and a symbol of Russia's annexation of the peninsula in 2014. Kyiv hasn't directly claimed responsibility, but Ukrainian officials have hinted their approval. Zelensky on Saturday saying today was not a bad day and mostly sunny on our state's territory. He said, though, unfortunately, it was cloudy in Crimea. Now, President Putin has now ordered the Federal Security Service to take control of the bridge. But this attack, a day after Putin's birthday, it deals him another humiliating blow as his forces continue to dramatically lose territory in the south and in the east. Now, Ukraine is smashing through Russian defense lines in Kherson, liberating village after village, making grim discoveries along the way, it must be said. Mass burial sites, hundreds of graves. Police saying one site containing nearly 200 bodies, including children. Now, the question is, what does Putin do now that he's been backed into a corner? It feels like a dangerous moment here. How does this impact the choices he makes in this war and the weapons he now uses? Martha?
Indeed, a dangerous moment. And Britt, this comes, of course, after President Biden's chilling warnings that the U.S. is now facing the prospect of a dangerous conflict not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought this country to the brink of war almost exactly 60 years ago.
It was 1962 the U.S. discovered the Soviet Union had secretly installed nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of the U.S.
It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
The missiles were eventually removed, but today Vladimir Putin has revived the nuclear threat. In a speech last month saying, when the territorial integrity of our country is threatened, we will certainly use all the means at our disposal. This is not a bluff. President Biden agrees, saying this week that Putin is not joking when he talks about the potential use of tactical and nuclear weapons because his military is significantly underperforming. And that last part is an understatement. With Vladimir Putin losing vital territory in Ukraine in the east and south, and now the explosion on the bridge in Crimea, President Biden saying the biggest challenge is trying to figure out an off-ramp for Putin, whose very future is at stake. And if Russia's nuclear threat was not enough, Kim Jong-un reared his head again this week in an alarming show of force. Sirens wailed and urgent messages warned Japanese citizens to take cover as North Korea launched a ballistic missile right over Japan, a missile that traveled farther than any other the North has tested. The U.S., South Korea, and Japan responded with its own show of force, conducting bombing drills from a phalanx of fighter jets and missile defense drills from the sea. But North Korea was undeterred, and a nuclear test could happen any day. But none of these threats have caused the U.S. to change its own nuclear posture of strategic deterrence, the nation's nuclear triad, the ability to launch nuclear counterstrikes from the air, from the land, and from the sea.
And joining me now is White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby.
And I'll have a clip of White House National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby later responding to questions about how close we are to nuclear Armageddon and President Joe Biden's comment that we're closer to nuclear Armageddon than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis, which, I don't know, I lived through the 70s and the 80s when there was a lot of threat of nuclear Armageddon in the 70s and the 80s, which makes me think that that was a little bit of hyperbole, but I'll show that clip coming up after the news summaries. That's actually the first clip, is the John Kirby clip. I mean, if you think the threat of nuclear Armageddon is the biggest story of the week, well, then ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos gave you the best coverage. They, Martha Raddatz had her intro, and they went to Britt Clennett over in Ukraine talking about what was going on with Russia and Ukraine and the blowing up of the bridge between Russia and Crimea. And then Martha Raddatz came back and gave you all this context about the Cuban Missile Crisis back, was that 1962, I think? And like how close we were then and how close we are now. And the only thing that was missing there was all the threats in the 70s and the 80s that were also made us worried about nuclear Armageddon after the Cuban Missile Crisis and before today. That kind of undercuts that argument. But the next news summary is kind of different. It's the CBS News Face the Nation. Major Garrett is in as the host this week, and their big story, this is one of the biases. It's not a partisan bias like Fox News has this terrible Republican partisan bias that I talk about all the time, but all the news outlets have biases towards being sensational, being simplistic, and one of the things that they have a bias for is if they have an exclusive guest interview or they have like their own poll coming out. That's all the cable news channels do this when they have like a breaking poll result. That's what the big story is on CBS News' Face the Nation. Major Garrett talks their Battleground Tracker poll and even brings on Anthony Salvanto, their like chief pollster or whatever his title is, to talk about their poll results. Which, is that really the biggest story of the week? Well, I guess poll results are kind of important, and I'll talk about them a little more after we watch that CBS News Face the Nation news summary from yesterday together over here.
Good morning. Welcome to Face the Nation. Margaret Brennan is off. We have new CBS Battleground Tracker polls from several key states. In Michigan, Democratic Governor Gretchen Whitmer is leading her Republican challenger, Tudor Dixon, 53% to 47%. In Wisconsin, we're tracking two statewide races. The governor's race between Democratic incumbent Tony Evers and his Republican challenger, businessman Tim Michels, is deadlocked, with both candidates at 50%. In the Senate race, incumbent Republican Senator Ron Johnson is polling at 50% against his Democratic rival Mandela Barnes, who was at 49%. We also learned last week in Arizona, incumbent Democratic Senator Mark Kelly is narrowly ahead of his Republican challenger Blake Masters, 51% to 48%. Joining us now to discuss all of this is CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, good morning. Catch us up on the dynamics of these Senate races.
Good morning, Major. So Wisconsin and Arizona are two Senate races out of, I think, 5 that will ultimately determine control of the chamber. So they're both close for reasons that are across all of these races, and that is it's the economy against abortion, which is to say Democrats are winning voters who are concerned about abortion. That's happening in Wisconsin. Mandela Barnes is getting almost 3/4 of those who say it's very important. And then the economy. Republicans are winning voters who say the economy is most important, going to punish the party in power, and that's the Democrats. He's getting almost 2/3 of them. Now, having said that, each party is sort of jockeying to try to add another set of issues to that list. And on the Republican side, one of those is crime. So they're running attack ads. They're trying to tie Democrats to this unpopular position, and it is unpopular in Wisconsin, of defunding the police. And when voters perceive, if they perceive that Barnes supports defunding the police, again, that's their perception, then they aren't voting for him. And he's behind Johnson on the idea of will their policies keep you safe. Now, Democrats, for their part, would like to add this issue of election integrity, threats to democracy after the attempts to overturn 2020.
Under that banner of threats to democracy, some Republicans won their primaries by denying or questioning the 2020 election. To what degree is that position either being embraced or backed away from or having an effect on the general elections they find themselves in now?
Well, look, for Republicans, it was almost a litmus test in their primaries, and they're still supporting their candidates regardless of their stance. There's a little bit of evidence that the position of trying to overturn 2020 hurts Republicans in this sense. If you look at independents who believe that Ron Johnson, again, their perception was trying to overturn the election, they're not voting for him. And the way it also connects is on candidate qualities. Take a look at Arizona. A majority of people say that they'd prefer their elected officials say that Joe Biden won, which he did. Now, when you look at voters who say that they think that the candidates are, or a Republican candidate is, talking about 2020, they're more likely to label that candidate as extreme as opposed to mainstream. And that goes towards candidate qualities where Democrats have tended to have an advantage. Those are the dynamics all at work here.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you.
So was that really the top story? The CBS News Face the Nation Battleground Tracker poll? And, you know, they talked about the polling in Wisconsin, Mandela Barnes versus Ron Johnson, but why didn't they ask a question as to who was the dumbest member of the U.S. Senate? Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, or Tommy Tuberville / Tuberville of Alabama? That's a poll question I'd like to see the answer from, and someone should get Anthony Salvanto to ask that question. Geez, or whatever, if they're going to make it the top story for no apparent reason. But anyway, you can let me know what you think in the comments section. And speaking of biased news summaries, this next news summary is from Fox News Sunday, which of course isn't even really a news organization. If you read this book here, The Loudest Voice in the Room by Gabriel Sherman, you know that Fox News was created as a propaganda outlet for the Republican Party, which is what you're about to see. They don't even put the Armageddon Ukraine story as their top story. I'm not, as is my practice, I'm just going to show you the host and the first reporter she goes to. So it's going to be Shannon Bream and then Lucas Tomlinson in Delaware. Later they have a report from someone in Ukraine, but since it's the second reporter that they deprioritized, I'm not going to show it, but there is plenty of bias in this reporting. They talk about, you know, high gas prices and Saudi Arabia, and they even throw in a mention of Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden is apparently a top story over in the Fox News universe that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch that news summary together from yesterday over here.
And hello from Fox News in Washington. The White House says it has no intelligence that any sort of nuclear attack is imminent, but the president's comments have created quite a stir. And now there is a mystery over what caused a truck explosion Saturday in the middle of the bridge that connects Crimea and Russia. It severed a key supply line for Russia in its war on Ukraine. This is all happening as Russian President Putin says he plans to hold on to territory he says he's annexed in Ukraine. In a moment, we will ask former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo about how he would address the escalations. But first, we begin with team coverage. Trey Yingst live on the ground in Kharkiv, Ukraine, with an exclusive report on what he discovered in a village Ukrainian troops reclaimed from Russia just days ago. And Lucas Tomlinson, who's traveling with the president in Wilmington, Delaware. Lucas?
Shannon, Russian President Vladimir Putin's state of mind is right now top of mind for President Biden.
Speaking at a Democratic fundraiser this week, Biden said we haven't, quote, faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The White House explaining it more a day later.
We have not seen any reason to adjust our own strategic nuclear posture, nor do we have indication that Russia is preparing to imminently use nuclear weapons.
The comments come as Putin has repeatedly indicated he could turn to nuclear weapons to protect Russia's gains in Ukraine. But the Russian army is still suffering humiliating defeats, and as hundreds of thousands of Russians have fled the country to evade his mobilization order. Also on the president's mind, the U.S. economy, which added 263,000 jobs last month, the fewest since April 2021, a sign of cracks in the labor market. Still, Biden claiming it as a win.
That's 10 million jobs since I've come into office. That's the fastest job growth at any point of any president in all American history.
It comes as gas prices remain 60% higher than when he took office. And as many Democrats are furious at OPEC Plus's decision led by Saudi Arabia to cut oil production by 2 million barrels a day. Michigan Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin calling it a new low and saying all diplomatic options should be on the table, including the withholding of American military hardware and security assistance that Saudi Arabia in particular is so dependent on. Saudi Arabia's top diplomat saying the U.S. has itself to blame.
With due respect, the reason you have high prices in the United States is because you have a refining shortage that has been in existence for more than 20 years.
The president also making headlines for pardoning thousands convicted of marijuana possession, and his son Hunter also in the news for an investigation into his taxes and a gun purchase. Shannon?
We'll talk about that with the panel coming up. Lucas Tomlinson reporting from Wilmington, Delaware. Lucas, thank you. Let's turn now to Trey Yingst, who is live with an exclusive for us on a newly liberated village in Ukraine. Hello, Trey.
So I don't know why Trey Yingst didn't get top billing there when, Lucas Tomlinson was talking about the possibility of nuclear Armageddon from the Russia-Ukraine conflict, and yet that conflict didn't get the top billing. That was kind of weird from Fox News Sunday, and they threw in like Hunter Biden, and they like paired Hunter Biden with the pardoning of people with federal marijuana convictions. Was that just me? I'm the only one who noticed that, or whatever. That there were all sorts of weird biased things going on in the Fox News Sunday news summary, but not quite as biased as Shannon Bream's interview of former Trump Secretary of State Mike Pompeo that I'll show you coming up. That's clip number 10. But we are actually we have clip 7 and 8 still coming up as news summaries. Fox News Sunday, obviously, that was the most partisan, biased political news summary, I guess. The NBC News Meet the Press news summary that is the next longest is actually closest to what I chose as my title topic. They talk about October and November surprises. Kirsten Welker talks about the President Joe Biden's comments about the possibility of Armageddon. And then this is actually the whole Herschel Walker abortion scandal, where he there are claims he paid for an abortion, even though he says abortion should be outlawed even in cases of rape and incest, but apparently not in cases where he doesn't want to have like another illegitimate child. And anyway, that was one of the big October surprises. And NBC News Meet the Press also talks about October and possibly November surprises, Armageddon, and abortion. So I guess this news summary is closest to the way I titled the topic of this week's video, which I will talk about with you a little more after we watch NBC News' Meet the Press's news summary together. Over here.
Good Sunday morning. I'm Kristin Welker in for Chuck Todd. Election Day is just 30 days away, and that means 30 more days of October and November surprises. The term October surprise was coined during the 1980 presidential campaign. Ronald Reagan worried Jimmy Carter would engineer a last-minute release of U.S. hostages held in Iran. Carter, of course, did not, but the term stuck. There are at least 3 stories unfolding that may produce a surprise this cycle. First, the nuclear threat from Russia. President Biden warned in a private fundraiser this week that we have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Then there are rising gas prices, now averaging just under $4 a gallon, which Democrats worry will be a sign to voters that there is trouble in the economy. But it is, of course, the Georgia Senate race, which produced the October surprise of the week, since it could determine the control of Senate. Herschel Walker, the Republican nominee, who's been running as an anti-abortion candidate, opposing abortion even in cases of rape or incest, spent the week denying allegations by a woman that he paid for her abortion in 2009. She now tells the New York Times he urged her to terminate a second pregnancy 2 years later. They ended their relationship when she refused. The woman, who is also the mother of one of his 4 children, shared a $575 receipt for her abortion procedure and a copy of a check from Walker reimbursing her, as well as a get well card he allegedly signed. Over the week, Walker's explanations have evolved.
I never asked anyone to get an abortion. I never paid for an abortion, and it's a lie.
Here's the card, and you signed it. Is that you?
Yeah, that's what I said. I was Sean. That looks like my signature. First of all, I never just put an H on anything. I never have.
If that had happened, I would have said it, because there's nothing to be ashamed of there. You know, people have done that, but I know nothing about it.
You said that if this did happen, there's nothing to be ashamed of. How do you?
Wait, I never said.
You said that this morning on you.
No, what I said, I was talking about something totally different than if this did happen. I said with my ex-wife in my past, nothing to do with what this woman said.
So
I said this here, the abortion thing is false. It's a lie. If anything happened, there's nothing to be ashamed of, because my ex-wife and I have been the best of friends with her husband and my wife.
Republicans have largely stood by Welker, as Texas Senator Ted Cruz told my colleague Vaughn Hilliard, "I want every Republican running for Senate in this country to win." I'm joined now by Republican Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska, whose toss-up race for...
And I already showed you a clip of Don Bacon. Oh, and I saw in the live comments during the live stream, Tom Trask pointed out that in the background of one of those Herschel Walker photos was Nikki Haley. That's true. Nikki Haley was in one of the backgrounds there. And that's one of the things that is so amusing about this whole Herschel Walker episode, is that that a bunch of other Republicans are going to get tainted by their... I think Tom Cotton is going to rally for Herschel Walker this week, and Rick Scott of Florida, Tom Cotton. They're like multiple Republicans who may be planning to run for president in 2024 are going to associate themselves with Herschel Walker, who has, I mean, if he got elected to the Senate, he could definitely be one of the candidates for dumbest members of the U.S. Senate, given some of the things he said about like climate change. You know, the bad air goes to China, and so, or our good air goes to China, and China's bad air comes here. Or like on evolution, like they say that man evolved from apes. Well, then why are there still apes? And I mean, he said a lot of ridiculous things over time, and his multiple lies about his background, and now about his the whole thing about paying for the abortion. That's not even what's really most damning about what we've learned about his personal life. It's more about how he fathers children, but then doesn't help raise them. He like abandons the children that he fathers. I mean, as someone who dedicated many years of my life to being a stay-at-home dad, absentee fathers really kind of bug me, and I don't think that's going to... I'm hoping Herschel Walker is going to lose, and Raphael Warnock will continue being the senator from Georgia, but I guess we have to wait and see. And I'm not done with all the news summaries. I have one more. This is the CNN State of the Union news summaries. In some ways, this is like the most fair and balanced news summary, because it talks about domestic policy anxieties on the economy and gas prices, but also foreign policy anxieties with Ukraine and Iran and North Korea, and especially the whole Armageddon issue, which I put in the title of my video, and I'll talk about it a little more after we watch the shortest and the last of the news summaries, CNN State of the Union with JakeTapper yesterday over here.
Hello, I'm JakeTapper in Washington, where the state of our union is jittery, anxious about the economy and news overseas, including North Korea, Iran, and Ukraine. President Biden heightened nerves this week, saying that the risk of nuclear, quote, Armageddon, because of Vladimir Putin, is the highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis almost exactly 60 years ago. As yesterday, Russia suffered a major blow to its war efforts, a truck bomb slicing in half the only bridge that connects Russia to Crimea. This hour, we're going to ask a critical member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee what happens now and a former ambassador about what he heard from Russian officials during his recent trip to Moscow. But we're going to start here at home. With just 30 days until the midterm elections, swing state polls reminding us this week that the economy remains the top issue for most voters. Gas prices are going up, inflation is persistent, but jobs numbers are strong as well. It's a complex midterm picture with plenty of races that will likely turn on just a few thousand votes. My next guest is a purple state governor who ran a campaign that brought together the anti-Trump wing of the Republican Party with today's MAGA conservatives and even won over some Biden voters in the process. He's been out campaigning for Republicans across the country, from Nevada to Kansas to Michigan to Georgia. Joining us now exclusively, Governor Glenn Youngkin of Virginia. Governor, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
I don't have any clips of Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. I played that through that part because that's the bias I was talking about, that where it's not partisan political bias like you see on Fox News all the time, but all the cable news, all the corporate news media has a bias towards their exclusive interviews. CNN had an exclusive interview with Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, and so their news summary kind of focused on him, even though, is he really the most important story of the week? No. But otherwise, JakeTapper, I think, did a pretty good job of giving a fair and balanced news summary on domestic policy and anxieties in terms of inflation and gas prices and all that, but also foreign policy anxieties and the whole Armageddon issue. But anyway, that's the last of the news summaries. And when I was watching the clips with you, I saw in the live comments, what was, here it is. Iscovini Garga talked about the Newt Gingrich comment on Herschel Walker. He's had many concussions, which I don't have a clip for that, but that was one of the more amusing things that happened this week. Was Newt Gingrich was a supporter, a defender of Herschel Walker by saying not only he had many concussions, but we need to get him in the Senate because he's like committed himself to Christ. That was the other thing that Newt Gingrich said, not remembering that Herschel Walker's opponent is the Reverend Raphael Warnock, who is the head minister at the church where Martin Luther King Jr. was also the pastor or whatever. But so like Herschel Walker and all of his fathering children outside of marriage and then not helping raise them, and apparently asking at least one of his baby mamas to abort a child she wouldn't abort. He's like the person who is committed to Christ, not the Reverend Raphael Warnock. Anyway, but that was one thing I wanted to point out there. But anyway, those are all the news summaries, and I did promise I was going to give you a clip of the White House National Security Council spokesperson over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos talking to the permanent co-host Martha Raddatz about President Joe Biden's claim that we are close to Armageddon, or are we really, or is there any evidence that Russia is doing anything? This is the White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby talking to Martha Raddatz about that issue. I put in the title of my video, and in the thumbnail I have like this big nuclear explosion. So this is the clip that actually tells us, well, maybe that's just rhetoric for Biden's October surprise, because nothing that American intelligence is seeing other than the public threats by Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, those threats are all there is. There's nothing beyond that makes us think Armageddon is about to happen. But anyway, I'll talk about that a little more after we watch John Kirby explain it on ABC yesterday together over here.
Morning, John. Let's start with President Biden's comments saying we are facing the potential of a nuclear Armageddon. I know the White House has said these are consistent with comments he has used in the past, but he's never said anything quite as stark as this. So is the president right? Are we facing a potential nuclear Armageddon?
The president was reflecting the very high stakes that are in play right now, Martha, when you have modern nuclear power and the leader of that modern nuclear power willing to use irresponsible rhetoric the way that Mr. Putin has several times in just the last week or two, as well as the high tensions in Ukraine over just the course of the last few days. So the president, I think, was accurately reflecting the fact that the stakes are very high right now.
And he gets a daily intelligence briefing, military updates from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. So are the statements the result of what he has heard or his own conclusions? Because those were really frightening comments.
His comments were not based on new or fresh intelligence or new indications that Mr. Putin has made a decision to use nuclear weapons. And quite frankly, we don't have any indication that he has made that kind of decision, Martha, nor have we seen anything that would give us pause to reconsider our own strategic nuclear posture in our efforts to defend our own national security interests or those of our allies and partners. What the president was reflecting was that the stakes are high right now, given what's going on the battlefield in Ukraine and given the very irresponsible and reckless comments made by Vladimir Putin in just the last few days. Now, look, he's also said we're not going to be intimidated. Neither we nor our allies are going to be intimidated by this, and we're going to continue to provide support and security assistance to Ukraine as is necessary.
You say you haven't seen any evidence that he has made a decision about this, but have you seen anything beyond Putin's rhetoric that leads you to believe he could do this? And if you did, what is it you would see?
We are monitoring this as best we can. And we have been monitoring his nuclear capabilities, frankly, since he invaded Ukraine again back in February. So we're monitoring this very, very closely. And what I can tell you is that through all that process, we just simply haven't seen an indication that Mr. Putin has either made a decision to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine or has done anything to get closer to that decision-making process. So we're watching it as best we can, Martha. And again, the best thing I can tell you is that we haven't done anything to change our own strategic nuclear posture. And that's really about as far as we can go. We're watching this very, very closely.
So, yeah, that is the Biden administration position on Armageddon. And apparently, Joe Biden at a fundraiser said that we are closer to Armageddon than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis, which seems like hyperbole to me. I lived through the 70s and the 80s when there was also a lot of threats of nuclear Armageddon, especially in the Reagan administration. There was at least one incident that I thought I don't think the Cuban Missile Crisis was the last time people were worried, is the point I'm trying to make. And I don't know, maybe what Biden said was hyperbole. That's based on what you just saw from John Kirby. That seems to be the correct answer. But this next clip, I mentioned that the Fox News summary, the Fox News Sunday news summary I showed you was kind of politically biased, and the mention of Hunter Biden that didn't make it onto. I mean, is it all the other 4 networks that are biased that they didn't mention the non-indictment of Hunter Biden? There was some October surprise leak from unnamed FBI agents who were like committing felonies by leaking the result, what's going on in a grand jury. So yeah, that was the most politically biased news summary, the one that mentioned Hunter Biden. Well, here is Shannon Bream, who I've mentioned many times is a partisan hack, questioning sort of Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State in the Trump administration, where he claims that the Trump administration deterred Russia in terms of their hegemony over Ukraine, when Shannon Bream never even cross-examined him about the first Trump impeachment, where Trump held up military aid to Ukraine until Ukraine did some bogus investigation into Hunter Biden. That was the thing I mentioned from, Hunter Biden getting a seat on some Ukrainian energy company and whatever. Here you can see Mike Pompeo claim that they deterred Russia and showed Russia that, solidarity and unity in terms of Ukraine, and there's no cross-examination about Trump holding up aid to Ukraine for the quid pro quo for the investigation into Hunter, or how the Trump administration, even if you believe those allegations, the Trump administration told Putin that the whole issue of Ukraine was a way to be divisive in the U.S. political system, because there's this whole pro-Putin, pro-Russia wing of the Republican Party, and what Trump did in the first impeachment investigation with the quid pro quo for them to get aid from the U.S. to oppose Russia. I can't believe Shannon Bream let Mike Pompeo get away with the answer that I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
Bridge explosion, extensive damage. This is a key artery and supply line between Russia and Crimea. Who do you think's responsible, and what's the impact on the state of the war, practically but also psychologically?
Well, Shannon, it's hard to know. My guess is that the Ukrainians had something to do with it, but we'll have to wait and see how that unfolds. We do know for sure that this is humiliating for Vladimir Putin. He built this bridge. You remember the pictures of him driving across it. It was one of their great achievements. I think it was 2018 when that bridge was built, so it's nearly brand new. And to watch it in flames, to watch the risk of the supply lines out of Crimea into southern Ukraine be at risk is certainly something that is a game changer on the ground in Ukraine. As Trey reported this morning, the Ukrainians are doing phenomenal work at liberating town after town after town, and the Russian military is failing desperately.
So I want to go back to the reporting also by Lucas from the White House about what the president said Thursday night. Here's a little bit more of his report from the White House transcript. It says, the first time since the Cuban Missile Crisis we have a direct threat of the use of the nuclear weapon if in fact things continue down the path they've been going. We've not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis. President went on also to say he doesn't think that President Putin is joking. He also says the administration's trying to figure out an off-ramp for Putin. Is there one, and would he take it?
Oh, my goodness. First of all, those comments were reckless. I think they, even more importantly, they demonstrate maybe one of the greatest foreign policy failures of the last decades, which was the failure to deter Vladimir Putin in the same way that the Trump administration did for 4 years. When you hear President talking about Armageddon as a random thought, just musing at a fundraiser, that is a terrible risk to the American people if he truly believes that he ought to be out talking to us in a serious way. More importantly, he should be doing all the things that are necessary to deter Vladimir Putin. Shannon, we've been here before, not only in October of '62, we've been here other times as well. And America has always pushed back against our adversaries by showing enormous resolve, executing quiet diplomacy in the same way that we did during our time in office, making very clear to Vladimir Putin that the cost of him using a nuclear weapon will bring the force of not only the United States and Europe, but of the whole world against Vladimir Putin. We ought to be doing that. I hope that they're doing this quietly.
Well, there's a lot of talk this week that what OPEC did, going against the lobbying of the Biden administration to say it's going to cut 2 million barrels a day, and production is actually...
So I kept playing that so you could see Shannon Bream did no cross-examination about the first Trump impeachment where they held up aid to the Ukraine, and made it seem like to Vladimir Putin might have thought that, oh, I can like divide the United States politics. I can create a wedge issue where Republicans are going to be pro-Russia and Democrats are going to be pro-Ukraine because Trump already did all this stuff to denigrate Ukraine and hold up the aid and the first impeachment. And there is kind of a weird pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party, but that didn't get covered at all on Fox News Sunday. And I also want to thank Lulu Girl for the Super Chat contribution there. And I think I've been watching the live comments, and I think I'm getting a lot of agreement on the weird partisan bias on Fox News in terms of Russia and the pro-Putin wing of the Republican Party. And Mike Pompeo got away with did you notice that bridge that got blown up, it was built in 2018? Who was president in 2018 when Russia built that bridge to the Crimea? I guess Trump didn't deter the bridge that just got blown up during the Biden administration. And on Fox News Sunday, they don't give the Biden administration any credit for rallying NATO and supplying Ukraine in a way that allows Ukraine to beat the Russian army. That's all missing. But anyway, I just wanted to point that out before I get to... I think I'm actually at my final newsmaker clip. I've shown the clips, the abortion issue with Herschel Walker, the Armageddon issue in terms of Russia and their possible use of nuclear weapons. But what other October surprises or November surprises might there be? Well, this last clip is from the governor's race in Arizona. CBS News' Face the Nation actually did a pretty good job. There's no debate between the two candidates. But the worst part about the Republican candidate for governor in Arizona, Kari Lake, is she just won't accept that Joe Biden legitimately won the election in 2020, even though the candidate for Senate, who Blake Masters, who's running against Mark Kelly in Arizona, he pivoted for the general election and said, oh yeah, Biden actually is the legitimate president, and there's no evidence that the 2020 election was stolen. Well, Kari Lake, the candidate for governor, just won't accept even what the Republican candidate for Senate in Arizona said, Blake Masters. She is still an election denier, which is the last newsmaker clip I want to show you before I end the live stream for this week. So let's see what she has to say and talk about it after we watch it together over here.
Earlier this week, Blake Masters, as you know, Republican nominee for the Senate, said he has not seen evidence of vote counting problems or election results that would have changed the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. He also said President Biden is the legitimate president. Do you agree?
I think we have major problems in our election system. And it goes back to 2000. We had Democrats saying that 2000 election wasn't fair. They were complaining the 2004 election wasn't fair. 2016, Kamala Harris spoke out and said that the electronic voting machines were hacked in front of her eyes, and nobody called them election deniers. And now all of a sudden in 2020, Garrett, we don't have free speech anymore. We can't speak out against our own elections. All I'm asking for is the ability to speak out. When our government does something wrong, we should be able to speak out against it.
Do you agree with the statement that Blake Masters made?
I'm not going to take on what Blake said. I'm going to take on what I said. And what I say is we have problems in our election. They haven't been solved in 2016. They weren't solved in 2018. Just a month or two ago during our primary election, and I'm sure your viewers don't even know this, Katie Hobbs' office advised the counties on how many ballots to print. This was 2 months ago. And they underprinted ballots in our biggest county, and they ran out of Republican-only ballots 1 hour into voting. We have to restore honesty to our elections.
In fairness,
we must restore honesty.
In fairness and in timing for both you and Katie Hobbs, we have to end it there.
So yeah, that was the last newsmaker clip. The Republican candidate for governor in Arizona is a total election denier, as you can see from that last newsmaker clip. I appreciate all of you who joined me for the live stream, my Monday Media Mix-Up. I've committed to continuing this Monday Media Mix-Up for another month, but I'm actually thinking about doing it for another couple years, all the way through the 2024 election. You can let me know what you think about that down in the comment section. If you are a very loyal viewer, you have watched all the way here till the end, and I appreciate that. So give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and there are links right underneath the video to be a monthly patron on Patreon, or to give me a one-time financial contribution through PayPal. I will be back next Monday and every Monday for at least another month, and then maybe another 2 years. I guess I'll talk about that with you a little more in the end of the Monday Media Mix-Ups coming up in the next few weeks. And until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.